Ben told me he would only give me a good introduction if I made sure to mention the Bitcoin event that he's working on for January. It's going to be announced next week, and it certainly is one of those areas where the knowledge of innovators is going to be completely transformative. But that's not what I'm going to talk about today. First of all, I want to say thank you for having us here in Spain. I've been here a number of times, but this is my first time in Catalonia, and I love it here. So I'm hoping that we will be back for other events. So you've probably heard about the Internet of Things. It's the buzzword. I've been trying to spread a slightly different hashtag, the Internet of Things and Humans. And I'm going to talk to you a little bit about what I mean. And I'm going to start by a quote, as I often do. Edwin Schlossberg once said, "The skill of writing is to create a context in which other people can think." So I'm not going to give you a deeply technical talk. I'm going to give you a talk that gives you perspective on some apps that are transformative and ask ourselves why. What is it that they're doing that we should be emulating? So let's start with what we would think of as an Internet of Things device, the iWatch or the Apple Watch, or the Nest thermostat. Now these obviously are new hardware, but it's firstly super important to remember that they're deeply data-backed. Google bought Nest because it was a connected thermostat with everything that means. When things are connected, the future is transformed by the data those devices produce. Back when I said that line, data is the intel inside of the next generation of computer applications, now well over 10 years ago, people would ask me, this was in the heyday of what we call Web 2.0, which was the second coming of the web after the dot-com bust. And they said, well, what's next? And I said, well, it's when collective intelligence applications are driven by sensors rather than people typing on keyboards. And that, I think, has turned out to be absolutely the case. That's where we are today. So, but I really want you to think a little bit about a general purpose Internet of Things device that we all carry, the phone. And there's a huge amount of innovation in the phone. My favorite phone right now is the Moto X. You can actually wake it up and ask it to do things without touching it. It's just always listening. It's making speech a first-class interface for me. It's doing all kinds of interesting things. I get alerts. It's connected to my watch. And that's really, this whole Android Wear thing has got me fascinated. I don't know how many of you have actually tried the Android Wear watches, but I find it incredibly useful. I'm getting alerts constantly, notifications, not just from Google, but from other apps that are connected into the ecosystem. And it's a really different experience. I can also talk to this thing, and it in turn talks to my phone, so I can initiate phone calls, texts. I can do all kinds of interesting things. So it's given me a kind of superpower. In fact, that's a key notion, I think, across all of the Internet of Things, is how do we use devices to make people more capable? I just was up driving into France and marveling at how I could navigate these tiny streets of small towns in Spain and France with this guidance from Google, and my watch buzzing and telling me, turn left, turn right. It's really a remarkable experience. But it's really also, I think, super interesting that Google now, in particular, has become a platform where I can say things like, OK, Google, call me a car, and it summons a car via Lyft. I can ask it to do various things. It's going to be a lot more of that. So this is a device that is transformative in the way we interact, not just with a computer, but with the whole network of services that we take for granted and that for so long we assumed would be driven by us, pawing at screens or typing. There's a transformative user experience happening there. So remember this, the smartphone is the most widely distributed Internet of Things platform, and the opportunities are not always obvious. I like to push people to say, wait, is this an Internet of Things app? And one of the ones I like to point out is the Apple Store. Here it was. You have actually a mobile device connected to the cloud that allows Apple to completely rethink the way that retail works. No cash registers, just salespeople with superpowers. They can look up products, they can check them out for you, they can actually enable self-service increasingly with your own phone. But they use this to deploy people in a new way. Those are salespeople with superpowers versus the old model, which was, we'll use technology to get rid of people. And we've gone down that path where there are fewer and fewer workers in stores, and then Apple suddenly creates the most successful retail franchise on the planet by square foot by putting people back in, but using the technology to enable them. Or, so just think about that magical experience if you've ever been in the Apple store and say, that's what I should be going for when I start thinking about the Internet of Things, when I start thinking about how do I deploy data. They use technology to give people superpowers. Uber is another great example of this, that fabulous experience of you go, wow, I can just summon a car. Although Uber has gotten a little bit of bad odor, so I'm going to talk more about Lyft. Come back to that. But I love this tweet from Aaron Levy. He said Uber's a $3.5 billion lesson. I think it's now $30 billion in building for how the world should work instead of optimizing for how the world does work. And that is your mission, to use this new technology to say, wow, if we could start over with these capabilities that we have now, how would we do it differently? You'd say, wow, no cash. The payment credentials will be stored so you can just get out when you get there. The mapping will allow people to find each other in real time. You'll be able to summon them. You'll be able to talk to your driver if there's need for communication. And of course, Lyft does the same thing, and they seem to have better business ethics. I think Halo does too. Anyway, here's the point. There's a real-world UI revolution ahead of us. And your mission is to rethink workflows and experiences in the real world in the way that Apple did, in the way that Uber did, and to take those capabilities of sensors and big data and say, wow, we could do it differently. But this is the key question for me. How do we use the capabilities of our devices to build better human experiences? Right? And one of the ways that you see in an app like Uber or Lyft is that you do less. You basically use the sensors to say, wow, well, we don't actually need people to enter an address. Sure, maybe if it's ambiguous, they'll have to correct it, but the phone already knows where you are. The phone already knows where the driver is. Right? So all you do is say, get me a car. And it's magic. You don't have to pay. So doing less is one of those really important things. Don't take for granted that you have to do it the way you did it before. Ask yourself, what does my device already know that we can rely on? So an example of a company in our O'Reilly AlphaTech Ventures portfolio, Cover, is working on an Uber-like experience for dining out. Basically, you show up, you have a reservation, they know you're there, you're auto-detected, your face shows up on the cash register for the restaurant, and when you're done, you dine and dash, except you don't because, of course, you're automatically charged because your payment credentials are stored. Or MakeSpace, another one of the companies we've invested in. This is a company that's trying to reinvent the storage market. If you actually know what's in the boxes, they don't have to go in your personal storage locker, and they're always in the back. They're always hard to find. Instead, they can be in a warehouse, just the way Amazon manages. You could even eventually imagine a robotic warehouse. You say, I want my skis, or I want my this box of books, and it shows up on your doorstep the next day. Again, rethinking real-world workflows and experiences because of the power of sensors and data. The next lesson that I really want to drive home is all of these systems are what Dave Stutz once called software above the level of a single device. This is one of the transformative things I've ever read in my career. It's a guy named Dave Stutz who used to be in charge of open source at Microsoft. And back in 2003, when he left, he wrote a little memo called On Leaving Microsoft. And it finished with a critique of how they were thinking about open source. And he said, why be distracted into looking backwards by the commodity cloners of open source? There's a new frontier where software collectives are being built with ad hoc protocols and with clustered devices. Robotics and automation of all sorts is exposing a demand for sophisticated new ways of thinking. Useful software written above the level of the single device will command high margins for a long time to come. So think about this. The Apple Store, Uber, any of these things are systems with multiple devices, multiple databases, multiple data sources. And we have to stop thinking that we're writing an app on a device and realizing that the internet is indeed the operating system and that we're pulling together many services. So just to take a look at Uber, you look at real-time location tracking, they don't do that. Dispatch, they do. Trip tracking, but names and faces, all this stored data, payment, dynamic pricing, reputation. This is all the data that's there, but they don't actually do all that. They've got another company that handles the payments, one that does the communications, others that do maps. So again, you're building on software and systems that are far bigger than your app and your device. Next lesson, use data to close the loop. Now, I got that line of closing the loop as a great description from Chris Sacca, who used to run special projects at Google. And he's tried to make all of his investments meet this characteristic. But let me give you an example of what I mean. Google Maps. This shows some version of my daily commute from Oakland, where I live, into San Francisco. And if you can see on the map, there's red on the Bay Bridge. There's not much you can do about it because there's only one way to get across there. But some days, it's red on the approach to the bridge. All right? You can see how the red is there still on the land rather than on the body of the bridge. And then Google says, actually, if you go around this way, it's longer in miles, but it will cut down immensely on the amount of time you spend in the red. And they're doing that increasingly in real time. In fact, my fiancée, Jen Polka, had an experience in Texas where she was driving to her grandmother's house, a new home she hadn't been to before. Google says, get on the highway and drive for 12 miles. About a mile into the 12 miles, it suddenly says, get off at the next exit. And as she's driving down the exit, wondering what's going on, she sees up ahead on the highway an accident. And then she sees other cars following her. They go through the neighborhoods, and bingo, they're back on the freeway past the accident. That kind of real-time measurement response is increasingly a characteristic of the apps that we're going to be seeing. And you have to ask yourself, what does that look like in whatever you're building? And one important point here, a big piece of that is an app called Waze, which was developed in Israel and that was bought by Google. And it's people-powered. It's people reporting, people running the app, measuring the cell phones. So it's super important to understand and realize that these are not miracles of some kind of AI. They're actually summing up of data produced by us in our daily lives and put to use in interesting ways. So we are part of the application. So these are systems made up of computers and humans working together. And whether it's the Apple Store, where the humans are sort of an output and an actuator for the data system, or whether it's Google Maps, where humans are this sort of implicit data source that's improving the data all the time, we are part of the system. Similarly, any web application has humans inside of it. That's the whole focus of our Velocity conference, which focuses on web ops, DevOps. Because effectively, these are no longer simply software systems. They are complex systems of people and software. And if you think that, and if you start with that premise, you're going to come up with a lot more interesting ideas about what to do. All right, so I've already talked about this idea of data, but I want to talk a little bit further about it in the context of the lean startup, measure and respond. You guys are probably all familiar with Eric Ries's work on the lean startup. We thought that was about web apps. And I just want to remind you that the notion, like the minimum viable product, that version of a new product which allows a team to collect the maximum amount of validated learning about customers with the least effort, is not just for web apps anymore. Every app, every real-world system is now subject to this development methodology, where we have to try things, we have to measure, we have to respond. So continuous deployment may seem a little harder when you've got a hardware device that you're pushing out, but you have to think about everything you do in the context of data feedback loops. So again, I already said this, but lean startup principles apply to every real-world service today. Now here's another lesson that I try to remind people of. Create more value than you capture. It's one of our mottos or aspirations at O'Reilly. It came many years ago when a guy named Brian Irwin, who was our VP of marketing, heard me tell the story about how many internet billionaires had said they'd started their company with an O'Reilly book. And I said, it's kind of funny, we got 35 bucks and somebody started a multi-billion-dollar company. And he said, that should be our slogan, create more value than you capture. But I thought about it, and I realized that that's actually true of every great company. You know, when Microsoft started with this vision of a PC on every desk and in every home, they were creating a huge ecosystem that we all grew up in. You know, when Google says access to all the world's information, they were creating a huge ecosystem of value. They were pointing to people. They were sharing with people. And you see in both of those companies, as they matured, they start saying, well, we actually have to do a trade-off between what we get and what we give. Now, and you see this even more you know, with a company like Uber, which is starting out right from the get-go, being very, very aggressive in making sure that they get the value. This is actually a post by Mike Lukides, which will appear on O'Reilly Radar later today. I actually went to the drafts page because I like the title, Uber is Breaking Bad. You know, the fact is, it's a litany of things that this company is doing that are hostile to their users. And we cannot do that. We have to start thinking about how do we build value, not just for ourselves in our startups, but we build value for customers. But that's not even enough, because you can justify a lot of stuff by saying, oh yeah, well, it's valuable for customers. You have to build a whole ecosystem, or eventually the whole system falls down. So, you know, a short way of summing up what I have to tell you is we have all these transformative technologies. And they can do amazing work in the world, but we have to remember to put these technologies to work serving people. They don't exist simply for us in our startup to make money. We will make money if we actually serve real needs. But I also want to talk a little bit at the end here about the work that I'm doing with an organization called Code for America, which is working with government. Now, when I talk about the Internet of Things and humans, government isn't quite there. But I will say this, government is the only institution in most of our societies, now I will say most because it's not true in every society, that actually takes serious thought to how do we support everybody? You know, how do we do the things collectively that need doing? And it's great to see the invisible hand of the market. We're all capitalists. But clearly there are market failures. And government sets aside enormous resources to tackle big, hard, hairy problems. And then what? Guess what? They do it so badly. They do it so badly that they're a laughingstock. They do it so badly that a site like healthcare.gov in the US, which should have cost, according to anybody in Silicon Valley, you know, a few $1 million, costs nearly $1 billion. You know, this is a terrible crime because there's so much that needs doing. So a lot of what we do at Code for America is to try to take these principles, and by the way, there's a Code for Spain, Code for Europe, there's groups all over that are working on this idea, but how do we take what we know and teach it to governments? And there's been a lot of progress in the UK in particular. I know a lot of you are from the UK. The UK Government Digital Service has built, for example, the uk.gov website, which replaced something like 2,000 former websites and gets more traffic than all of them put together with a site that was designed with user-centered thinking first. You know, and if you look at their design principles, I recommend this document. If you just, never mind working on government, if you just want to think about how do I think about building a great system, start with needs. In this case, it says user needs, not government needs. Do less. Design with data. You know, do the hard work to make it simple. Iterate, then iterate again. Build for inclusion. Understand context. Build digital services, not websites. Be consistent, not uniform. Make things open. It makes things better. Everything I've been talking about today is in this document, and you should really go study it. We have a similar document at Code for America. There's also one that we've worked on with the White House. So the set of how do we get user-centered design principles in a government is a super important idea, but it's also how do we get these kind of user-centered design principles into everything we do as technologists. So Jennifer Palka, who's the founder of Code for America, adapted a wonderful speech by Abraham Lincoln, our president during the Civil War in the US, which ends with the idea that, government of the people, government of the people, for the people, by the people, shall not perish for this earth. And Jen adapted it into the slogan for Code for America, to say government can work for the people, by the people in the 21st century, but only if we make it so. We have to make an act of will to actually take these services and tackle hard problems that are otherwise not going to be faced. And she makes a good point. For the people could also be read as for people. By people can also be read as by people. And I just want to take that and adapt it for you in your work. Never mind the government side. Just say we can build services for people, by people, of people in the 21st century, but only if we make it so. We can't be blinded by our love of technology. We have to remember that people come first, that this is to serve people, and we need to make it an Internet of Things and humans. Thank you.